Hello to Mr. Beat. This is Mr. Les saying thank you very much for your recent video on the end of the world. Found it quite interesting. Had a little bit more to say than I might have wanted to, just typing in some comments, so I thought I'd make a response video. You're one of my favorite channels. I like you, an alternate history hub, history guy, a few others. I'm a Christian, so I watch a lot of spiritual things too, and I like travel videos. Lavi and Ollie going around the world was one I've been following. But I really like your comparison videos. I think they're very interesting. I'm not an American, so American history stuff, some interest, but I don't need to know everything about every president. But of course, I really liked your Calgary and Edmonton video because Calgary is better. So come here next time, please. I wanted to make a response video for your recent video on the end of the world. Quite enjoyed it. Educational, enlightening, interesting. I think to a lot of degree you did seem respectful, but yet I kind of wonder, sounds like you might not be a real believer in a lot of these things. I am. In fact, you can see here behind me the illustrated chart of world history. Plus, my wife gave this for me a few years ago for a gift. The folding prophetic chart illustrating the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation. I'll just put the box up here for some more decoration. There we go. Okay, that's enough. Now, the angle I'm going to take with this video is not going to be any kind of real big attempt at giving you some sort of rebuttal or trying to prove some grand point that maybe you may not agree with anyway. Just to sort of explain, because you have raised a serious question and a good question. A question that deserves to be answered. And if people who are believers would just, study a little more, pray a little more, we don't have to be afraid of hard questions. And we can answer them kindly, in love, and show value for the people who ask them. And that's what I'm hoping I can do today. So pretend you're a sociologist, an anthropologist, or some other sort of ologist, and set yourself apart from all the various belief systems of the world. Come on a journey with me for an unbiased, I hope, look at why God would word things this way in the prophecies of the Bible or other religions maybe, and yet we've never come to the end of time, even though there's been prediction after prediction after prediction. And I loved that list you showed us from Wikipedia and all those people that you talked about. I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. We came out of a movement that had a big prediction for the end of the world being in 1843 or 1844. Their final date was October 22nd. Didn't happen. It's called the Great Disappointment. When that group of people fell apart, a couple of groups, a couple of religions came out of it. We were one of them. And what we believe God did for us was basically showed us that it wasn't the actual second coming. The date was right, but the event was wrong. That the judgment has now begun for the earth. That God is judging the earth now before the second coming. And when you think about it, it makes sense. I'm just mentioning this because we're very big. Get out of the light here, or out of the shadow. We're very big on prophecy. When we title a set of meetings that we host in a city, the big name speaker comes to town, takes us a month to do a seminar, but the title is usually Revelation Speaks Peace. We emphasize the happy ending, not the doom and gloom. For those who love God, the end of the world is a new beginning, a rescue from heaven, from the suffering of this world. So it's a good thing. And that's why probably a lot of people made all those predictions for those generations. But let's look at that question. That's what I'm talking about today. Why would God lead people to let the world down by making a prediction? People get ready. Nothing happens. time and time again over history, as you showed us. The second coming of Christ, the end of the world. Imagine it like that old Aesop's fable, where the donkey is being led along with a carrot on a stick hanging out just in front of the donkey. The donkey's continually walking toward the carrot, and the owner of the donkey uses the carrot to get the donkey where he wants it to go. The second coming of Christ, the end of the world, has always been 2 steps away in world history, and we've just been continually repeating step 1 in generation after generation after generation. That's why everybody always thought the end was near. I read through the Bible when I was in my teens, cover to cover. As I got into the New Testament in my early 20s, that was a question I had. Why were they writing like they thought the second coming would be in their lifetime? Step 1, step 1, step 1. That's the explanation. In Isaiah, we've got a Bible verse that says, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, says the Lord." I'm not going to quote it in detail. I'll just put it on the screen here. But people can only really imagine things from their own point of view. The world around them, the culture, the life they're in. They can't really see the big picture of world history. So God, in trying to meet people where they are, had to take that into account. And that's why the prophecies are worded the way they are, so that every time there's a forest fire, every time there's a flood, a war, a famine, someone might think, maybe this is a sign of the end. If you carefully look at that big list in Wikipedia that you talked about, Mr. Beat, you'll see a common pattern. Most of those predictions, whoever made them, was predicting the end would come just a little bit beyond their own lifetime. Basically, they could only imagine the world from their point of view. They were predicting the end of their world. They were taking their fear of death, their concern for death, or their hope for heaven, and projecting it onto the world that they knew. And maybe, just maybe, sometimes there were life-changing events that happened, like a war or something, a government falls, and it ends up being the end of the old world, the old way of life for a society. I can think of the best example, of course, being the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. By then, Peter, Paul, most of the disciples were dead. The second generation of Christians was in their middle age, and the third generation was coming onto the scene. So it was the end of their world, and that's why you compare the prophecies in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, you can see there's a multi-level aspect to it, speaking to this idea of step 1 being repeated. The fall of Jerusalem was the end of their world. So it was a model for the actual end of the world. This is why God hides the day of our death from us, the time we're going to die. This is why God is hiding when the world's going to end from society, because he doesn't want us to just party on, rob banks, snort cocaine, gamble, drink, smoke, swear, all the other stuff that Christians say is bad, and all of a sudden, last 10 seconds of your life, oh God, I'm sorry, can I come into heaven? He wants us to show by the way we live our lives now that we really do want to follow him, want to believe in him, want to do, live our lives the way he wants us to live them. So it's a test. You had a quote from Billy Graham. Fascinating that in his early days, he did the same thing. Projected an end of the world scenario from the point of view of his own life. I found a quote back in 1994, watching Billy Graham on TV. He was speaking in Modesto, California, and he talked about people asking him why he doesn't emphasize prophecy in the end of the world. And his answer was, I may not have the exact words, but on my notes here, Jesus' second coming takes place at the end of the world, but when you die, that's the end of the world for you. Before I quote any Bible verses, I'll give you a line from Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. Opening scene is the Kobayashi Maru test. Saavik is frustrated because there's no way to win. And Kirk says to Saavik, how we deal with death is at least as important as how we deal with life. So again, getting back to what I just said a few minutes ago, the test is, how are we going to live our lives now? Not a last 10-second deathbed confession. That doesn't work. It's not the way it works. Okay. All right, so we'll get a couple of Bible verses, and then we'll wrap up with a big concluding one-liner. I'm actually hoping sometime soon to do a video on multi-level prophecy. I just figured it's going to be a really hard script to write. I just haven't been up to it yet, but it's on my list of things to do. So if you like this video, making this in late 2024, look for early 2025. There might be something here on multi-level prophecy. All right. So Mark chapter 13 and verse 7, the words of Christ himself. And when you hear of wars and rumors of wars. Cross-reference with Matthew 24, there's a lot of emphasis on that. But what does he say in Mark here? Do not be troubled. For such things must happen, but the end is not yet. And to verse 8, he says, these are the beginnings of sorrows, when he talks about all these things. For those who have a minimal interest, a first-time interest in spiritual things, they're going to look to a war, a forest fire, a flood, a famine. They're going to say, is this a sign of the end? Jesus says, yes, in a way it is, but there's more to it. And the more to it is, cross-referencing with Matthew 24, the gospel is preached to all nations. And that's the sign that we are closer to the end than ever before. I'll read the verse here. Actually, I'll read verses 12, 13, and 14 of Matthew 24. And because lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. But he who endures to the end shall be saved. Very significant words there. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all nations, and then the end will come. Going back to Mark, the rest of the discourse on prophecy isn't emphasizing events like wars. It goes into the fact that there's going to be a false revival and a true revival at the end of time. And when people who don't have true faith start persecuting people who do have true faith, that's the real sign that the end is near. When it happens on a worldwide scale. We had people in generation after generation not knowing their world was a lot smaller than the world. But now we know how big the world is. And for the first time in human history, especially with social media, it's possible for the entire world as one group to make one decision for or against God's truth at one time. So that's the one-liner I'm going to end with here. Don't ask, when will the end of the world come? Ask, am I ready?